Welcome gang. Today is Monday. We are starting a new week. So, on this new week, we have a couple of new things worth talking about coming right from Blizzard, all of which will come live in patch 10.0.7, which at this point is starting to get quite close to the release since it's already on the PTR, it's already been testable for quite a while, so I'm assuming by the end of this month or the start of next month is when we could expect perhaps the release of patch 10.0.7. So of course what is more pressing to talk about is something related to power, related to a character power. You might even call it a buff, because it looks to be somewhat of a rework of Retribution Paladin. So we have a few things about cosmetic effects, about new activities, etc, but of course what comes first is changing an entire spec. Ret Paladin has been quite the popular spec, despite rarely, if ever, being a very meta spec. Whether it was Mythic Plus or it was the Raid, Ret Paladin never really had that much of a spotlight. So with this change, we already touched on this when we saw the first round of possible additions which Blizzard pushed through, and it was quite the sensation because one of the possible spells making it into the patch was Retribution Aura, which was going to give a raid buff to Retribution Paladin. So this one making it, near mandatory to have not just one paladin, which you already need in a raid because they are bringing Devotion Aura, which is also mandatory, but even a second paladin to bring Retribution Aura. So this was quite the significant change when it came to making Ret Paladin different. But, especially if you are one of the players playing Ret Paladin, I'm sure you might just not like the idea of becoming popular or becoming meta simply because Blizzard gives you a must-have buff or a must-have raid debuff that you have to bring, right? You would rather have your spec, reworked. You would rather have your spec changed significantly to make it better to play, for example, rather than just getting a very powerful buff. So Ret Paladin seems like he's going to get a very powerful buff, but also quite a few changes to the toolkit of the spec. So because of this, let's go and take a look at some of the more important and the more interesting changes that seem to make their way into patch 10.0.7. Remember that most of these have been at the moment just data mined. They aren't even in the talent tree, they are not actually confirmed, they are still unconfirmed spells, and we still don't know for sure that these are the planned talents to give Ret Paladin. This is still very likely something that Blizzard is testing internally. Still we have the opportunity to check them out. One of the quite interesting one was the change to Vanguard's Momentum, which has existed for quite a while because this one is a legendary of expansions past. It's supposedly getting changed. Now, instead of giving you a stacking increase of holy damage up to 6% more holy damage, it gives 10% more critical strike chance to your Hammer of Wrath, and on enemies below 20% health generates one additional holy power. This is quite interesting, it's quite cute. It also gives Ret Paladin a little bit more of a profile of being an execute spec, because now they gain something when the target is at low HP. So this one was quite the possible interesting change to Vanguard's Momentum. Another interesting change is the addition of Answered Prayer, which isn't yet on your talent tree. It was introduced first and now it's been slightly nerfed, because previously this talent was going to proc at 40% of your HP, now it's proccing at 25% of your HP, so perhaps it's gonna happen less often, but the talent, when your health is brought below 25% HP, you instantly cast a free Word of Glory on yourself with a 60-second cooldown. So this one is a decent extra defensive to the spec. Ret Paladin isn't particularly known for having good defensives. I know, it sounds weird. They have an immunity, which kind of makes it sound like they are quite sturdy, but actually they are not. They have a shield absorbing damage, an immunity, and that's kind of about it. It's not really that strong as a melee spec in particular. This talent would help them quite a bit self-sustain themselves throughout a fight, throughout a Mythic Plus key. Talking about defensiveness, there is also this talent which is still buffing the actual ability for damage. State of Execution is increasing the duration of execution sentence by 12 seconds, which is already quite significant, but also reduces the damage affected targets deal to you by 10%. So this is quite significant. You know, it makes sure that within your burst window you are also taking 10% less damage. It's obviously just not quite having 10% damage reduction, because in this case execution sentence only hits one target, so you would be getting a 10% damage reduction only to one target. If you are, for example, in a Mythic Plus pack with like 7 enemies, only one of those 7 enemies would be doing 10% less damage to you, but it is still something, not to mention the massive 12% longer duration of execution sentence. Then there are quite a few possibly gameplay changing talents, like for example Holy Crusader, which makes Blade of Justice deal Holy Strike damage. Holy Strike being the new term to define physical and holy damage at the same time. This is relevant because the Ret Paladin's Mastery increases your holy damage. But Blade of Justice used to be just physical damage. So this talent effectively reads your Blade of Justice now scales with the damage increase of your Mastery, making it possibly better as you go and grow in item level and do more and more damage. Now Blade of Justice also can grow and scale with Mastery, while previously and currently it doesn't. Another cool extra, wanting to pretend to be a rogue, Crusader's Reprieve. Your Crusader Strike's range is increased by 3 yards, and every time you use your strike, you heal yourself for 3% of your max HP. This is, mostly just utility, right? Having more range, meaning you can stay further back from the hitbox of the enemy and also healing yourself for a bit every time you do damage. What I thought was a bit more interesting than this was Blade of Vengeance. Blade of Justice now hits nearby enemies for physical damage, deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. So this is a talent to make your Blade of Justice, on top of being able to spec your Blade of Justice into doing holy damage, into scaling with your Mastery. Now you can also turn it into an AoE ability. That is something which might change the way you play, in particular, of course, in AoE. Talking about changing the way you play, something like Crusading Strikes, where your Crusader Strike replaces your auto attacks. Now that's an interesting one. Okay, fine, you might say this makes this spec even more simple, right? This makes it even less important to click your buttons, somewhat similar to like Demon Hunters, where they can replace their main spammy ability to something that works passively. Ret Paladins seem like they are getting somewhat of a similar treatment. Of course, what has taken, besides all of these changes, which of course, until we get the full picture, until we see all of the talent tree, these are all quite interesting, quite of course exciting for Ret Paladin players to test them out as soon as they become available in the PTR. But of course, what has caught their attention primarily has been the first dash, leap, blink type of mechanic, type of ability given to Ret Paladin for the first time in 20 years. So the name being Wings of Liberty. Now, this seems like somewhat of a placeholder at the moment. The name is the same as a bunch of other abilities. The icon is the same as a bunch of other abilities. Even the text is the same as another ability. I'm sure you might recognize the ability we're talking about. We're talking about Heroic Leap of Warrior. But this seems to be what's in mind when it comes to Ret Paladin's mobility, giving them some type of leap, some type of jump away on a decently long cooldown. Of course, it doesn't have the same amount of talent support that Heroic Leap has for Warrior, but it's still something for a spec. Of course, famous for being quite immobile, famous for being quite slow and not having the same amount of mobility options as many other specs in the game. So this is quite interesting that Blizzard is thinking about this change. So while it is exciting, of course, that we can see all of these possible ideas coming from the Ret Paladin rework, for now, these are all just conjectures. These are all just data mining of talents that might or might not make it into the first round of testing in the PTR when it comes to Ret Paladin, the new version of Ret Paladin. So with this out of the way, main news for today of what lies ahead of us, the ongoing rework of Ret Paladin. So this was all of the news that we're going to give out at the start of this week on this Monday. It's time to leave each other. And as usual, we start our goodbyes by thanking all of my Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help in the growth of this channel. You can, of course, still support in other ways that don't include having to spend money, like, for example, liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Those are still perfectly fine ways to show your support. Also, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as checking out whenever one day I'm being told. Oh, fuck. Oh my god, I made a mistake. You can follow me on Twitter. See, yes. And then on Twitch one day I will come back streaming. Fuck my tongue. So, guys, now we have to leave. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, oh my god. How is it still so hot? I did this like 4 hours ago. How?